Hi, I'm psychic, paranormal investigator, and author John Russell. And if you've watched my previous YouTube video on UFOs and those who investigate them, you'll probably realize something that I realized and forgot to do just now. I told you that I would tell you about some of my UFO experiences, and then I forgot to do that. So here's another video for you, and I'm going to share some of my most spectacular UFO experiences with you. This experience is written about in my book, Writing with Ghosts, Angels, and the Spirits of the Dead. And this goes back a long way to my late teenage years, early 20s, somewhere around in there. And having been exposed to all these paranormal experiences since the age of 5 or 6, and having been aware of my psychic gifts since the age of 5 or 6, I nonetheless did not believe in UFOs. I had seen and heard people interviewed. I had read the stories, read the articles, read the books, and nothing convinced me. Now, mind you, I had this psychic gift which had proven itself to be valid. I had all of these scores and scores, probably hundreds by then, 100 or 200 or more, paranormal experiences actually occurring on the physical plane, and yet I couldn't believe in UFOs. I didn't believe in UFOs. So I have to tell you the background of my first UFO sighting because it's what led up to it, and it was an incredibly bizarre experience, and I think somehow intrinsic to or connected to somehow the UFO experience. So I had this is back when I was living in West Texas, and I had come out of this building, and there was a short 2-lane street, very, very narrow, not wide, and a parking lot where my car was, and it was right across the 2-lane street there. I could see my car in the parking lot from where I was standing. And as I went out, as I opened the door, the first thing that happened was this blast of wind hit me in the face. That's not unusual in West Texas. We have severe thunderstorms, we have tornadoes, and so on. So my first thought was, oh, looks like a storm's coming up, and I better run for my car. So I closed the door behind me and looked over toward my car in the parking lot, and by my car, down in the parking lot, touching the ground, was this large cylinder of a cloud coming down from the clouds up above and touching down in the parking lot. So my first thought is a small twister, a small tornado of some kind. But as I stood there and stared at it and looked at it, orbs, glowing orbs of color begin to emerge out of the cloud and then recede back into the cloud repeatedly. And there were orbs of red and orange and yellow and green and blue. So I'm looking at this, and at the tender age of whatever I was, around 20, somewhere around in there, I figured I'd had a stroke, that I had gone around the bend, gone nuts, had gone crazy, was hallucinating. This just can't be happening. And as I stand there watching this cloud and watching these strange manifestations in this cloud, I also noticed another peculiar phenomenon. And that was that with this cloud down in the parking lot, and with all the wind, the clouds flying by overhead, and with all the wind, you'd expect all the debris at the base of the cloud in the parking lot around it to be blowing around or circling around, or at least being blown away or moved. And all the debris around the cloud was completely still. Nothing was being blown around, nothing was disturbed, nothing was moving. So that was incredibly bizarre. And as I'm standing there watching this cloud and trying to figure out what to do, should I just turn around, go back in the building for safety or what, I get this irrational urge to walk toward the cloud. So I take a few steps toward the cloud, and it moves toward me in the parking lot. I stop and it stops. I take several steps back, and the cloud moves back several feet in the parking lot. So I walk toward the cloud again several steps, and it moves several feet forward toward me. I stop, it stops, I back up, and it backs up. So I'm back by the door, which I came out of now, and it opens and whacks me in the back. And this buddy of mine says, "Oh, I'm sorry, what are you doing standing so close to the door?" And then without waiting for an answer, he goes, "Oh, geez, looks like we're in for a storm." And then he looks across and sees the cloud and goes, "What in the world is that?" And I say, "Okay, I'm not hallucinating. I haven't gone nuts. He sees it too, so it's real. It's there." So I tell him, watch this. And I walk toward the cloud, and the cloud advances toward me in the parking lot. I back up several feet, and the cloud backs up several feet. And I look at him and go, isn't that the weirdest thing you've ever seen? And he looks at me like I'm the weirdest thing he's ever seen and goes, bye. And he takes off a different direction where his car is parked. He's not even going to hang around to discuss this. So I'm like, well, here I am left with this paranormal event. Now what do I do? And suddenly, without any warning, the cloud sucks back up into the clouds above, and everything passes on over. And I'm like, okay, here's my chance to run for the car. So I do. I run for the car, get in. I'm like, what in the world was that? So I pull out onto the street, and it begins to rain. And in West Texas, now this is not everything's bigger in Texas. It's not that. It really rains hard in Texas. I mean, it just can dump buckets on you at an unbelievable rate and flood yards and streets and so on and so forth in 15 minutes time. So it begins to rain, and I turn on the windshield wipers, turn on the lights on my car, and then it starts pouring, and it starts coming down unlike any rain I have ever experienced before. This is paranormal, a paranormal phenomenon, because I've never experienced rain like this. As I'm driving along, the rain comes down so hard, I've got the windshield wipers on high, and they're batting against this rain and not doing a bit of good. I can look out the passenger window of my car, and I cannot see the cars that are angle parked on the street sticking out into the lane that I'm driving down. I look in front of me, and I almost run into a car that stopped at a stoplight before I see him and get stopped. And with my lights on high, even my high beams on, and I had to turn them on high, and you're not supposed to, and especially they tell you that in fog, not so much rain, because it reflects back on you or makes a big reflection and you can't see. But it didn't do that in this rain, and my low beams weren't doing any good at all, and I had to have the high beams on to have any visibility. And this is about, I guess, 4 in the afternoon, somewhere around in there. And so it's just virtually pitch black because of the rain, and I'm just stymied as to what to do. If I keep driving, I'm going to hit somebody, or somebody's going to hit me, because there's about maybe beyond the hood of my car a foot of visibility. That's with my wipers going high speed and my headlights on high beams, and there's maybe a foot of visibility beyond the hood of my car. That's how dense the rain is, how hard it's coming down. So I know where I'm at. I've counted the street lights, the intersections and everything, and I know where I'm at. There was a Sears Roebuck store on Beauregard, and in the back on Twig Street there was a parking lot for the Sears store. And I said, okay, if I can just creep around here safely and make it to that parking lot, if I can just see the entrance to the parking lot, I'll pull in there, and I'll either wait the storm out, or Sears at that time had a great sporting goods section in the basement. I said, I'll jump out. I don't care if I get soaked. I'll run down there and just wait out the storm by looking at the sporting goods. So as I'm driving along, I'm still leaning over periodically, trying to see where the cars are angle parked on the street so I don't sideswipe them, and I can't see them. And so this is just a like feeling your way in the dark kind of thing, and I'm trying not to run into the car in front of me, and cars are coming upon my tail end and jamming to a halt because they've nearly hit me, and I'm like, man, this is insane. So I did make the turn onto Twig, and I thought, okay, I've got about half a block to go here before I get to that parking lot. And I'm again leaning over. I'm holding on the steering wheel and leaning over in the passenger seat, trying to look out the passenger window to see where the cars are angle parked so that I don't sideswipe them. And as I'm leaned over that way, the rain instantly stops. Now, I don't mean it slacks off. I don't mean it was heavy and then it is light. The rain was coming down so fierce that I couldn't see the cars angle parked on the side of the street 1 second earlier, and 1 second later, there's not a drop of water falling from the sky. Instantly, the rain has stopped. There's not even a mist hitting the windshield. So I reach up and I turn my wipers off, and of course it's still overcast. The clouds are still overhead. And I look in front of me, and I've got visibility as far as the eye can see. I look in my rearview mirror, visibility as far as the eye can see. And I'm like, well, this is really strange. So about this time, cars in the oncoming lane on Twig Street start honking, and people are rolling their windows down and pointing up at the sky out of their car windows. Cars are swerving into our lane and nearly hitting other cars, and horns are honking and blaring. And some people have stopped their cars and have opened the doors and have gotten out and are looking up and pointing at the sky. My first thought is, oh, hell. This is like an F5 tornado, and this is why all the weird weather phenomenon, and that's what they're pointing at, and it's fixed to come down and destroy us all right now. I'm too young to die, damn it. So that's my first thought, seriously. So I lean back up in the seat, and I can see over the Sears building. We've crept close enough to the parking lot that I can see over the top of the Sears building, the rear of the Sears building. And as I look up, hovering about 20, 30 feet over the top of the Sears building there in the air, is a shiny silver metallic disc, maybe 30, 40 feet in diameter, something like that. Just hovering there over the Sears building. No smoke, no flame, no sound, no movement, no nothing, just hovering there. And I literally did a cartoon eye rub. And looked back up, and sure enough, it's there, and that's what everybody had been honking at and pointing at and getting out to look at and so on. And I reached for my door handle, and I was going to get out and stand out in the street and look at it. And as I touched my door handle, the UFO barely perceptibly moved. You could just barely see it move. And as it did so, the clouds, the low clouds that were behind it, came from behind it, covered it over, and instantly the rain was back in full force, just as it had been. Didn't gradually start up again. There wasn't a mist, there wasn't a sprinkle, there wasn't a rain. Just instantly the rain was back in that blinding ferocity that it was before, in 1 second's time. So there was a guy in front of me, and I said, if I hit this guy, I don't care, my insurance will cover it, I can blame it on the rain. I'm going to follow this guy, and he's got to verify what I saw. In spite of seeing it with my own eyes and all these other witnesses, I still just had to confirm that. So he was turning into the Sears parking lot as well, and I followed him right on his bumper. He parked, I parked beside him. I saw his dome light come on in his car, and he jumped out and ran for the vestibule of the Sears store. I jumped out and ran after him, and the rain was pelting so hard it hurt. And I shielded my eyes and ran after him. And when I went into the Sears vestibule, he was standing there on the mat you wipe your feet on when you come in. And his head was hanging down. His glasses were beaded with water. He hadn't even wiped his glasses off. And he was just staring down at the floor, just standing there stone still. And I walked around in front of him, and he realized that I was there, and he looked up at me, and I said, excuse me, but did you see what I just saw? And he said, yeah, but I damn sure ain't going to tell nobody. And he sidestepped me and walked off through the store. So that was when I had to become a UFO believer. I had to change religions. You know, there's a saying, be willing to follow the truth wherever it leads you. Well, I had to follow that truth. The truth was UFOs were real, and I had just had my first sighting. The fellow's reaction was very common for the time. I think this was somewhere in the 70s, somewhere around 70, somewhere around in there, 72. And back then in West Texas, if you told anybody you believed in UFOs or ghosts or anything else, they looked at you like you were touching the head or an idiot or whatever, and you could lose your job and all kinds of things. Sadly, I don't think it's much better today. Maybe a little bit, but maybe not. So that was the reason for his reaction. He didn't want any ridicule or scorn heaped upon him or whatever. So that was my first UFO sighting. I've had a few others, but the most spectacular one was here after I had moved to Florida. And we have this beautiful courtyard. I sit out there at night and look up at the stars and enjoy some music and so on and so forth. And so one clear, beautiful night, I was looking at the stars, and Venus was up over to roughly my east. I was looking at Venus there and looking at the stars, and from that direction, from a southerly direction, cruising around on my east side there and going northward, and then eventually northwest, came this orange glowing orb in the sky. And from where it was at that point, it looked about as big in the sky as Venus did. and no lights blinking, no sound, no engine noise, and I quickly realized it wasn't a plane, and as it made the turn, came around in front of my house and moved to the northwest. It got a little closer, and I could clearly see it was just this translucent, glowing orange orb. And I said to myself, son of a bitch, that's a UFO. And so mentally, I sent the command to it, and I also spoke out loud and said, hey, if you can hear me, stop, back up. And guess what? It stopped and stood still in the sky, and it backed up a little bit. And I went, oh my God. And about that time, it shot from where it was so close to me in less than a second's time, and I could follow it with my eyes. I had a view all the way up into the heavens. And it shot from where it was in less than a second's time up to where the big airliners fly, that height. And it paused there for a second, and then in less than a second's time, it shot up into the stars at the same height as the stars, and kind of moved around there among the stars a little bit, and then shut off into the heavens and vanished. Wow. And to this day, I'm gobsmacked having seen that. No noise, no sound barrier broken, no nothing. And for that thing to have heard me and responded to me, and then to have shot off and taken off like that. And we go back to my first UFO discussion. Now, why didn't it communicate with me? Why didn't it give me some information? Or was it under the command of someone that said, okay, that's enough, now get out of here? I don't know. We don't know the answers to all these things, and I wish we did, but we still don't. So those are a couple of my more dramatic UFO experiences. And now I'll tell you about the time I went to Roswell, New Mexico, to the Roswell UFO Museum. And people that have heard me as a guest on podcast have heard this story, but I'll tell it for you here for those that haven't. And this story is in the new book, Knock in the Attic. I had gone to Roswell, New Mexico in 1998 for Alien Encounter 98, and I went there to do psychic readings, and they had all kinds of speakers and so on and so forth. And the late Stanton Friedman was a speaker there, and I got to go to one of his lectures and hear him, and it was fascinating. And one morning, I didn't have to be there doing readings yet, and so I went downtown to the Roswell UFO Museum. And it wasn't open yet, so I was standing there on the sidewalk looking in the windows and just waiting and just looking around the town. And this woman walks down the sidewalk, and she spots me, and we nod and say hi, hello. And for some reason, she stops, and she engages me in conversation, and she says, have you been to the UFO Museum before? And I said, no. I said, as a matter of fact, I've never been to Roswell before, so this is my first time here and my first time at the UFO Museum. And she goes, oh, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm actually a psychic, and I'm giving readings at Alien Encounter 98. She goes, oh, how interesting. And she goes, well, I can tell you this then, and you'll probably believe it and relate to it and understand it. And I said, what's that? And she said, when we were kids, me and my brother, when we were small kids, we were outside playing when the UFO came over and crashed, and we saw it. And I was like, wow. And she said, yep. She said, we were out there. We saw it clear as day. She said, wasn't a blimp, wasn't a weather balloon, wasn't a plane, wasn't a helicopter. It was a UFO. And she said, we could tell from the way it was flying through the air that it was in trouble of some kind, that it had some kind of problem, that there was some kind of trouble. And then we saw it going off over in the distance, and we saw the evidence of the crash, whatever that was. And I was like, wow, this is, thank you guys for setting this up. This is how incredible to see, to meet, and to talk to an actual witness to the Roswell UFO crash. And so we talked a little bit more at length. And one of the questions I asked her, I said, why don't more people like you that were eyewitnesses, why don't you come forward and why don't we blow this thing open a little bit more? And this is what she tells me. She said at the time, the people that were witnesses to it, or that subsequently investigated it on their own, tried to find out anything about it, she said there were military authorities, there were government authorities, and there were some people we didn't know who were, that came and threatened us and said, in some cases, if you talk about this, your bones are going to be found out in the desert. So, in other words, a direct death threat. And that took me aback. And after she told me that, she snapped her head left and right a couple of times, looking up and down the street, and said, "You know what? I've said too much already. I've got to go. Goodbye. I'm sorry. Goodbye." And took off. So even after all of those years later, she still had that fear from having talked about that, having seen it, and having been threatened and exposing that. So that was a phenomenal experience. One other thing I want to share before I leave you, and I'll have to read this here. I will make the link available in the description section. But the European Commission's Defense Industry and Space, DEFIS, tweeted on their Twitter channel that they are going to crack down on online discussion relating to flat earth, UFOs, and aliens, as they feel there is disinformation permeating all sectors of our society when it comes to these subjects. They intend on working with the EU Digital Services Act to put a plan in place in the coming months. So in other words, total, complete, pure censorship on individuals who want to talk about UFOs, such as myself, in the European Union. Let's hope other governments don't follow suit. Let's hope the U.S. doesn't follow suit. Again, it's time to contact your congressman. It's time to get on the government's back and say, hey, we need some disclosure. We need some honesty. We want to know what's going on, and to not let them censor us, to not let them stop the further investigation of these experiences and what is actually happening. For those of you that haven't seen my first UFO video, I'll put a link to that in the description as well. I hope you're enjoying these. I would enjoy your feedback. I have more listener viewer questions to answer. I didn't get to one this time, so I'll post it next time. But check out my website, johnrussell.net. More information on me, and if you desire to get a reading, you can schedule one there. Check out the websites for my books, writingwithghosts.net and aknockintheattic.net. And I'd appreciate your purchase of those. They also make great gifts. And if you want to read it right now today, you can go to Amazon and get the Kindle version, or go to Barnes & Noble and get the Nook version if you have a Nook reader. I'm enjoying doing this. I hope you're enjoying listening and that it gives you some food for thought. I've been John Russell, psychic, paranormal investigator, and author. I've enjoyed this, and I'll see you again soon, and I'm wishing you great blessings. God bless. Bye-bye.